Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder why some things feel more causal than others, even when they seem to lead to the same outcome? Well, this new study dives deep into how we think about what causes what, and it is pretty fascinating. So imagine this, you're watching someone kick a soccer ball and it goes into the goal. Easy enough, the kick caused the goal. Now, imagine someone tries to block a ball but totally misses. And because they miss, the ball goes in. It feels a bit different, right? Saying their failure to block caused the goal sounds okay, but what if we said their failure to block scored the goal? That sounds a bit tough. This research digs into why we feel that way, and it is all about the words we use and the way our brains process causes. The scientists in this study noticed that we use different kinds of words to talk about causes. They call them lexical and periphrastic causatives. Think of score or activate. As lexical, they're single words that pack a causal punch. Then you have phrases like cause to score or allow to activate. These are periphrastic. They're longer and use helper verbs. Now, there are two main ways we seem to think about causation. One is about production. This is like when you throw a ball and it hits a window. The throwing produced the shattering. It is about one thing directly causing another, maybe by transferring energy, like a pool cue hitting a ball. The other way is counterfactual. This is about what if. If something hadn't happened, would the outcome still have occurred? If without that thing, the outcome wouldn't have happened, then that first thing made a difference, and we tend to see it as a cause. So, if Louis hadn't failed to block the ball, maybe the goal wouldn't have gone in. The big idea from other researchers which this study is testing is that we might use those different kinds of words for those different concepts. Lexical words like score might be for that direct productive causation. Periphrastic phrases like cause to score might be more for that counterfactual thinking, where we look at what would have happened if things had been different. Now, here comes the really interesting part, and what this study is all about. There is something called the action effect. In situations where something good happens because of a combination of things, we tend to see actions as more causal than inactions. For example, if you need to do two things to get a reward, and you actively do one of them, we see your action as quite causal. But, and this is the twist when things are set up a bit differently, this effect can flip entirely. This is called the reverse action effect. It happens in situations where you only need one of a few things to happen for an outcome. If you actively do one of those things in this setup, it can actually feel less causal than if you had done nothing. This might sound weird, but the researchers found it happens. Here is why this is a crucial test for those ideas about lexical versus periphrastic causatives. If lexical words are all about production, they shouldn't show this reverse action effect. Production is production, no matter the setup. But if periphrastic phrases are linked to counterfactual thinking, then they should show it. So, the researchers predicted, if the lexical-periphrastic distinction holds for productive counterfactual concepts, we should see the reverse action effect with periphrastic language, but not with lexical language. But there is another possibility. What if we use counterfactual thinking for all causal judgments? Regardless of the words we use, if that is true, then both lexical and periphrastic statements should show that reverse action effect. This is the main question the study tries to answer. So, first, they did experiment 1. They basically recreated an earlier study with periphrastic language, like cause to activate. They wanted to confirm that in and situations conjunctive, actions are seen as more causal, but in or situations disjunctive, inactions are seen as more causal. And guess what? They nailed it. They replicated those findings. In conjunctive scenarios, people agreed more that an action caused the outcome. But in disjunctive scenarios, they agreed more that an inaction caused the outcome. So, the reverse action effect was confirmed for periphrastic statements. Now for the big test, experiment 2. They took the disjunctive scenarios from experiment 1, where they already saw the reverse action effect. This time, they showed half the participants the periphrastic statements from before, cause to activate, and the other half lexical statements activate. They wanted to see if the reverse action effect, where inactions are seen as more causal than actions in or situations, would show up for both types of language. In the periphrastic conditions, they used sentences like, Louis subscribing to Vivault caused his Infinity Play account to activate. And in the lexical conditions, they used similar sentences, but with the single verb like, Louis subscribing to Vivault activated his Infinity Play account. And the results were super clear. They found that in these or scenarios, people consistently judged inactions as more causal than actions, whether they were using periphrastic language or lexical language. The key finding here is that the reverse action effect showed up for both types of causal statements. There wasn't a significant difference between them. This means that the difference in how we use lexical versus periphrastic words might not neatly map onto just productive versus counterfactual thinking. The reverse action effect, which is a hallmark of counterfactual thinking, appears to influence our judgments regardless of whether we use a single verb or a longer phrase to describe the cause. So, what does this all mean? This study challenges the idea that we use lexical causatives only for productive causation and periphrastic causatives only for counterfactual causation. The results suggest that counterfactual thinking, this idea of what if, is a much bigger player in how we understand causation in general, even when we use simple, direct words like activate or score. It seems our brains are more unified in their approach to causation than we might have thought. When we consider causes, we're likely leaning on counterfactual reasoning as a primary tool, no matter the linguistic packaging. This doesn't mean there are no differences in how we use these words, but it suggests the fundamental machinery of causal judgment is heavily influenced by counterfactuals. This doesn't mean the previous work showing differences in how people use these causatives is wrong. It just means the reason for those differences might be more complex than a strict mapping to two separate causal concepts. Future research will likely explore these differences more, looking at how context and pragmatics might play a role in why we choose certain words over others. It highlights how subtle linguistic choices can still reflect deep cognitive processes. Ultimately, this research leans towards the idea that we have a more singular, counterfactual way of understanding causation. This doesn't mean that the productive concept isn't part of the picture at all, but it suggests that when push comes to shove, especially in tricky situations like the reverse action effect, counterfactual thinking is the dominant force. It is a fascinating glimpse into how our minds construct reality and assign blame or credit. It makes you wonder how much of our daily judgments about cause and effect are really just sophisticated. What if scenarios playing out in our heads? What this paper mostly tells us is that the words we use to talk about causes might not be as strictly tied to different types of causal concepts as some researchers thought. The robust finding of the reverse action effect across both simple single-word causes and more complex phrases suggests that our brains are using counterfactual thinking, imagining what would have happened if something else occurred as a fundamental way to judge causation, regardless of whether it is an action or an inaction in a specific scenario. It implies our causal understanding might be more unified and counterfactual driven than previously assumed, at least in these experimental contexts. It is a great example of how experimental philosophy can tackle deep conceptual questions by looking at how real people actually think and talk about abstract ideas like causation. So that's a wrap on this study. What do you think? Does it align with how you think about causes? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the mind, be sure to like this video, subscribe to Rubin's Mind Lab for more science explained simply, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration into the fascinating world of psychology and neuroscience. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.